This is the new TC Pride Podcast, episode 25, part 4 of our 4-part series on transgender equity issues. TC Pride Podcast, we are on location at the Exchange in Minneapolis here with Gender Revolution 8. And Andrew, Billy talked a little bit about how the younger kids benefit from the Little Rainbows program and being a part of the organization. In your experience, what are some of the ways that that some of the youth have benefited from being a part of Gender Revolution 8 and Gender Jam?
I think it's mostly just being able to be in a space where you're 100% accepted for whoever you are and whatever you like, who you are. Yeah. Whatever you like to do, whatever your life situation is. It's a space where you can step away from all that and just be comfortable with your surroundings. I think the biggest thing for me was a couple months ago, we had a kid from southern Minnesota come in and who had just this horrible life, was constantly beat up at school, and just came and sat down and had fun and was just smiling and having a great time. That was a huge moment for me where I just kind of saw how good Gender Jam can be. I started kind of coming in February. February 28th was my first meeting. We went to a game store, and it was weird for me because I had never been just completely surrounded by trans youth. And I was just like, what am I supposed to do now? I'm not just the token trans kid. I am community? What? And then it transformed for me specifically into just being able to just take up space and have some really good friends that I get to spend time with on a regular basis.
And Cal, I would guess that the various support groups and services that are provided by MTHC also provide that same sense of community for other people within the transgender community.
Absolutely. I think that the youth programs really grew out of what we had seen happening in the community with the sort of, it's not formally adult groups, but it really sort of all ages groups, I think is the best way to describe it. We were interested in bringing that to a younger contingent because we do know people who transition earlier tend to have better outcomes in terms of overall quality of life and that sort of thing. Some of the groups have had social activities happening afterwards. So, oftentimes, the topic of the day or, things that come up in group might be really heavy emotionally for people. But there's also the opportunity afterwards to just, go out for pizza afterwards and support a local business and get to know each other a lot better. And so I've actually, made friends in the trans community just by showing up to, kind of freak out about my gender. Another thing that I thought was, this was a surprise to me. I probably, it's one of those things where after it happens, you're like, oh, of course. But the Mondo Queer Beach Party has actually been really important for all ages. There's a lot of body shame that people internalize being transgender, both before and after transition. And so providing a space where the majority of the people who are there are transgender, can help us shed a little bit of that. And people who otherwise would never go to the beach out on their own will suddenly feel a lot more comfortable in that space.
So, Andrew, at the forum, there was a lot of discussion about youth issues. And there was also some discussion about adult-led solutions versus youth-led solutions. So in your opinion, how important is it that there are youth-led organizations that make efforts towards equity within the trans community?
I think if you really want to achieve equity for youth, the youth have to be leading it. You can't have adults trying to run everything. Adults can't really understand what it's like to be a youth because they were a youth so long ago, or maybe even if it wasn't so long ago, they don't know what it's like to be a youth in the present. And so they have no real experience on what it's like to be a youth right now. So if you don't know what it's like, how are you going to fix it? You can hear everything, you just don't really understand it unless you have the experience. So unless a youth is participating, unless a youth's voice is being heard, it's really impossible to achieve true equity from it. You can try and get as close to it as possible, but without the youth's voice, you can't really get there.
And Billy, sort of in a broader scope here, how important is it that trans community member-led organizations receive the funding and support that they need?
I think it's vital. I think like everything else, when you have youth-led organizations or POC-led organizations or immigrant-led organizations, that those are the folks that are going to know how to best serve their own community, right? So I think a lot of the funding that is happening now, which is great, there's a lot more funding for trans issues, it's not going to be as effective as it could be, and it might not be effective at all. And that's unfortunately what I'm seeing a lot, especially in the Twin Cities area, is that, there's 2 organizations that are trans-led, and we're one of them, and the other one just started a couple years ago, right? And it's just not, the programs that are happening aren't reaching all of us. They might reach one segment of the population and not everybody else, or they might not reach any of us. There's a lot of stuff that we do, and so does Transforming Families, the other organization, that are really, really specific to our community, that are really, really helpful. And both organizations are completely volunteer run and tiny, tiny budgets. Our budget keeps our doors open and sometimes buys us needles. Like, it doesn't pay anybody to do anything. Anything you see in this exchange got donated, including the chair you're sitting on. Our community is amazing, and we can do call-outs. We were really low on money 2 weeks ago, and I thought I was going to have to shut down the shot clinic for a week because we didn't have enough needles. I did a call-out, and within 2 days, we had enough needles to run for a week. So our community will hold us up that way. It's just not a sustainable way to run. And it's the way we've been running for the shot clinic, at least for 10 years. And so we're working on it really hard. But what we keep hearing back from funders is, wow, your grant application was great. Wow, your programs are amazing. You're doing exactly what the trans community needs you to do. Your organization is just too small for us to give money to. So nobody wants to give you money until you already have money, so you can show that you can manage money. But then we're stuck. And so, like, when I was talking to our last grant manager, that's where he said we were stuck. He's like, you're kind of stuck until somebody wants to gift you money so you can show funders that you can handle it. Where are we going to get that? We don't know. So I think that's where I'm a little frustrated. And like, yes, trans folks need to be leading stuff, but we also need to be trusted to lead stuff. I think all too often we're still seen as the folks who need to be helped. Also with some sort of prejudice that we're mentally ill because we were considered mentally ill for so long, and that we wouldn't possibly have any way to take care of ourselves. And like I said before, we see that in a lot of communities. We see that in POC communities, obviously in youth communities, immigrant communities, that dominant culture should be taking care of us, and we're not trusted to take care of ourselves when that's exactly what needs to happen for it to be effective.
And actually, there was a little bit of terminology I just wanted to put out there for people that maybe aren't familiar. So there was cisgender, which was actually defined at the forum. So there was that, and then POC, which is another term that people might not be familiar with.
People of color. And then cisgender is folks who identify with the gender they were assigned at birth. So instead of constantly calling me a trans man and you a real man, now we both have qualifiers. I'm a trans man and you're a cis dude. Like, awesome. Both different kinds of dudes.
So you said that the community has been very supportive and very responsive when you've had times where you've had needs for the organization. What are some specific needs that MTHC and the youth-led organizations here are facing right now?
I think some of the stuff is basic. Like, we used to get a grant that helped us pay our rent that is no longer available this year. So we're really struggling this year to try and pay the rent. So the beginning of GR8 has been really amazing because they've been doing a lot of fundraisers to help us with that. There isn't a lot of organizations that do a lot of funding around needles. So when it comes to needles, we're really low. And then there's the basic stuff of trying to have a community space that isn't funded. I can do call-outs, and it's amazing when we get our basic needs met. But as you can see, this room is kind of dark because every other light bulb is blown out, and we can't afford to buy light bulbs. Like, it's little things like that like people don't quite think about. We had a time where somebody donated a mop and then somebody stole it out of our back hallway. So like, we had 2 months where we couldn't mop the floor. And people were bringing in their mops from home, and like 3 people would be mopping with a home mop instead of an industrial one. So there's little things like that when you consider trying to have a community space and trying to do all the programming that we do. That yes, our community can support us to an extent for us to scrape by, but we shouldn't always be on that model of scraping by. It shouldn't be about like the little we have and giving out all this much more that we don't have. We shouldn't have that scarcity model. It should be capacity building. It should be really well funded because, oh my gosh, all the stuff that we're doing. We had Ignacio came by. He's like a national trans POC activist. And he came through this winter and he's like, you do what? you do how many programming? And he's like, what's your budget? He's like, I work for an organization that has like something like 10 times our budget and did maybe 3 programs. He's like, I can't believe you have a food shelf and a clothing shelf and youth programming and more than one youth program. Like, my budget is for 1 youth program. And I'm like, oh yeah, we do that for free. So it's like stuff like that it doesn't seem like we should be able to do it, but with community support we can, but it's just scraping by doing it. And it's not sustainable. Like, I have a large amount of volunteers that work with us. Like, everybody from our executive director down are all volunteers and have been. That's not sustainable forever. Like I said, we just hit our 10 years and we're like feeling it. We're feeling the 10 years of working for free. And we're feeling the 10 years of like dumpster diving chairs or calling out for shelving. And that's really hard to sustain. And our community needs the services that our volunteers and our organization provides. And we can't just suddenly go away. But how do we sustain that without more buy-in from folks who actually have the funding and the money to build our capacity?
So one of the challenges for building capacity with our adult programs is simply the fact that people often will go through transition and ultimately leave the community and assimilate into sort of the cisgender world. So those people who are willing to stick around and help us out as volunteers or board members, a lot of times the length of time that they're able to do that is relatively limited. So we're always looking for volunteers who are willing to commit for a year or longer, especially with our shot clinic. There's substantial training that's involved with that. So we prefer to have people who are willing to commit to those longer term investments volunteer-wise. Partly because of the training capacity.
So part of the problem, I'm using air quotes here for people that are listening to the podcast probably, is that you have such an awesome group of really ambitious young people that are really that are really trying to accomplish a lot on what you said is basically a very, very limited budget and resources. Andrew, we were talking sort of in between segments here, and you were telling me about some of the future plans for Gender Revolution 8 and there's another clothing drive, that kind of thing. Can you maybe let people know kind of what's coming up in the future for the program?
So we have a Mondo Queer Beach Party tomorrow, last one of the season, and in a couple months we're going to be having another clothing collective. But in the coming months, we're going to be planning a lot more community nights. We have a ton of movie nights we want to have. We have kind of forums that we have a whole list of potential fundraiser ideas that we just need to work more on getting together. So just stay updated with us, Gender Revolution 8 on Facebook. You can follow us if you go into your page settings. If you want to, and just to stay updated and keep current with what we're doing to create trans equity in the Twin Cities.
Great. And then how can people find out more about Minnesota Transgender Health Coalition in general and some of the needs that they're facing, Billy?
We have a website, mntranshealth.com. And then we're also all over Facebook and Instagram. We used to have Tumblr, and then I said no. But we have a Shot Clinic Minneapolis page, the Exchange Minneapolis, Minnesota Transgender Health Coalition, Gender Revolution 8, Gender Jam, Little Rainbows, more pages than I could possibly handle but there's lots of ways to find out what we need and what we're doing. And then, coming and seeing us and seeing what we do here.
And as we wrap up here, is there anything that any of you would like to add to the broader discussion about trans equity, which is sort of the overarching theme of this entire discussion?
I think it's, raising trans voices, trusting that we know how to take care of ourselves, trusting that we are the experts on our lives, that we don't necessarily need people to take care of us. Just because somebody has studied our communities, has 3 letters after their name and a doctorate in trans studies, does not mean they know something better than a trans person does. We are not inept folks, just like any other community that isn't the dominant community, right? We can do this for ourselves and we want to. We just, unfortunately, still need help from the dominant community to do so in the form of funding and in the form of space and in the form of listening to us and hearing our voices. So, yeah.
Cal?
So I think I'd just like to point out that, we need to pee has sort of shown up as a hashtag that is really just, a matter of baseline civil rights. Are we able to access public accommodations on an equal basis to cisgender people? But when we get right down to it, that's a really, really sort of baseline level of what we consider to be equity, there's a lot of deeper issues in the trans community that we're dealing with related to, discrimination on the job, discriminatory health insurance practices. And these are, with more awareness, they're starting to get highlighted a little bit more and get a little bit more attention. But there's, we need to go beyond the bathrooms to really understand what's going on with transgender healthcare.
And Andrew.
I think another big point is for what cisgender people can do to help trans people, and that is to be the best ally you can be. So just not assuming everyone is cis, respecting people's pronouns, respecting people's names, respecting people's identity, and just trying to help them feel as comfortable as they can feel in a certain space.
So that's going to wrap up this episode. Thank you once again, all of you, for sharing your time and perspectives with the Twin Cities Pride podcast. And we look forward to speaking with you each again in the future. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
The TC Pride podcast has been a production of Podletter Media and Twin Cities Pride. Subscribe now on iTunes or Google Play and submit your first Pride story at myfirstpride.org.